It hurts when I walk, 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 but my doctor says I have to walk, walk, walk through that pain in order to build collateral vessels and improve my circulation for peripheral artery disease. Well, you know what? You might get a little relief after you hear what Dr. Seenan has to say. Right, Kevin? Kevin, over the last couple of weeks, our friend Dr. Seenan from Scotland has been sharing some new research that he and his team have been working on. And today we're going to be talking about TENS devices. Have you ever heard of using a TENS device while you're walking to help distract you so that you can walk, walk, walk even further?
I haven't.
So it could be really.
I don't believe in distraction while you're walking, but not to worry. That's just
Uh-oh.
me.
Uh-oh, Dr. Seenan, we're in trouble.
Yeah.
So did I phrase it right? It is a little bit of a distraction, from the pain. It's not like putting your earphones on though, Kevin, and completely ignoring your body. You're actually, I think, in tune with your body in order to be able to use the TENS device effectively.
Actually, there is
That's
a
what I'm
place for distraction, because you have a really hard hill climb on the bike, and you struggle to the top, and then you do the same hill climb talking to a friend, and you get to the top and you don't even remember the climb. And
See,
so
there
in
you
that
go.
respect, I
Point
I
proven.
reserve judgment.
Okay. I love it. So, Dr. Seenan, this is something I've only seen research coming out of your team on the TENS device. How did you, before we get started, how did you even come up with the idea to start looking at a TENS device for people with PAD and helping them to walk further and faster?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for having me once again. And so, yeah, after our conversation last week, I knew this might be a little bit controversial with Kevin's opinions related to kind of pain relief from walking and experiencing, listening to your body, which I would totally agree with. I think it's really important. So, yeah, but I do think, well, we'll see. We'll find out whether there's a place for TENS. In terms of how we came to this, it was interesting. It was actually within my undergraduate degree. So when I was learning to be a physiotherapist way back
Okay.
when, I had one of my professors, one of my lecturers at university, had a big interest, or was an expert in pain and kind of pain relief. And one of the kind of most common things we use within physiotherapy, or one of the things we did use, was electrotherapy. So things like TENS machines, so using electric currents, in other words, for as therapy, as kind of in different ways. And what we were actually doing at that time was looking at experimental pain. And so there was this method of creating experimental pain within the lab, where you actually put a blood pressure cuff around someone's arm,
Ow.
inflate the blood pressure cuff so that it occludes the arteries, so reduces blood flow
Yeah.
past the cuff, and then get them to exercise, so do kind of hand grip exercise. And this brings on this experience of what we call ischemic pain. So it's pain related to which is what claudication is as well, is related to the reduced kind of nutrient supply to the muscles distal past this blood pressure cuff. And so we were looking at, the experience of this pain, what it feels like, how it affects people's, activities, but we're also looking at ways to reduce it. And TENS was
Yeah.
one of the things we were using, and it seemed to work. And so then my supervisor, my professor, had a colleague who happened to be a friend who happened to be a vascular surgeon. And I think they were talking at one point, and my professor was telling this friend about how TENS seems to work for ischemic pain. And this vascular surgeon was like, well, wait a minute, I know some people that have ischemic pain, and perhaps TENS might work in a clinical situation. And that was where the kind of research was born. So it was this idea that perhaps if TENS works on experimental ischemic pain, would it work in clinical experimental pain, i.e. in people with peripheral arterial disease and claudication? So yeah, that was where it all began.
Wow, that's incredible.
Can you explain what a TENS machine is? Because I've never
Oh,
seen
that's
one.
good.
I don't know what it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so a TENS machine, TENS stands for, it's an acronym, it stands for transcutaneous electrical nerve stimulation. So the transcutaneous means across skin, Electrical, obviously electrical current. Nerve, it's stimulating the nerve, and stimulation is the last, is the S. So what it is a TENS machine is normally quite a small device which generates an electrical current, which is kind of passed via electrodes that you place on the skin. And so the electrical current goes between these electrodes just on the surface of the skin. And what happens is when the electric current is flowing between these electrodes, that kind of, it stimulates the nerve, specifically the kind of A beta fiber afferents, which kind of pick up this kind of sensation. And so what happens is when the TENS machine's turned on, you feel this tingling sensation in the area where the electrodes are. And so this is, again, this work goes way back. Actually, I think when I was writing I do a PhD on this, and part of the introduction to TENS is, I think that the ancient Egyptians used to use electrical eels for pain relief in this same
Wait,
way.
what?
So they figured out that if you stand in a kind of a tub or alongside electrical eels, it can actually reduce it can be a kind of a pain relieving remedy. And then there was further work was done all the way through the kind of 19th or 20th century, looking at how this works. So there were very famous kind of pain scientists called Ronald Melzack and Pat Wall, who were based within in North America, and they did lots of kind of the cellular kind of basic physiological work, and they came up with this idea of this pain gate theory, which is the thing that kind of goes behind this idea. It's the theory that if that you can only kind of process one type of pain at once, and it's because of this mechanism in your dorsal horn of your spinal cord, where your peripheral nerves come in and they synapse with the tracts within the spinal cord, and there's a kind of a mechanism there. Whereas it's the best way to describe it is that what happens when you bang your elbow or your knee, or if you hit it off something, one of the first things you do is often you go to touch it and you rub it. And when you rub your elbows that you've just bashed off a door or something like that, you feel less pain. And the reason you're feeling less pain is because your body preferentially passes up the touch sensation, so you're rubbing of your elbow, rather than the pain sensation, which is passed by kind of smaller diameter, slower kind of nerve fibers.
So it's
And
like a distraction, basically.
exactly, as you say, so the pain is still there. There's nothing, it's not physiologically not doing anything to the tissues or to what's going on peripherally. It just distracts you. You don't feel the pain sensation as much, or you just feel something else. You feel the tingling rather than feeling the pain.
Yeah, when I'm getting my blood work, I always, if they go in one arm, I'm pinching the other arm with my nail to distract. It works.
It works, and that's 100%. And so there's lots of work on this kind of distraction and attention aspects as well. That, as you say, if you're doing something, listening to music, talking to a friend, just can distract you from that perception of pain and reduce the feeling of it too.
I noticed in the dentist when I was having a really painful procedure based on something I heard on NPR about a woman in Iraq, that if you actually look at the pain as opposed to trying to run away from it, because you don't have a distractor, it actually reduces the pain quite a bit. Whereas when you try to run away from it, you create this kind of conflict in your mind. So yeah, pain is pretty interesting. This reminds me of peeing on an electric fence, but I won't describe the details.
Yes.
We have a live studio audience here in case you ever want to join at info@padhelp.org. Just go ahead and message us. Or while you're on YouTube, just subscribe to our channel, because everyone's going to want to hear this story. Go ahead, Kevin.
Oh no, I peed on an electric fence that was hidden in the grass on a farm when I was working, and it literally threw me back about 10 feet. As my reflex was to get away, and so I clearly jumped. I was young, yeah, and it sure hurt. But pain is pretty interesting. So your work is really interesting. So I'm kind of, are we going to see one of these machines?
I can certainly show you some pictures. I don't have one on me at the moment in at home, but yeah, I can show you what one looks like. There's so many different variations though. You get they're generally kind of they kind of pocket size, used to fit in your pockets, but these days there's wireless versions and all sorts. I can show you what it looks like.
Well, it sounds like a torture device to me.
I have an old school one that my mom used to use. I just found it. It's like I could actually get it if you wanted. It's this big and has all these electrodes on it attached. And I thought I'd get the courage to use it, but this one is so big compared to the new ones that are available today. I think it would scare people off.
Yes, yeah, I think that's the key thing. And I think our understanding of TENS and how we use electrotherapy generally in healthcare has changed quite a lot over the past few years. So, very much used to be something that was done to you by a healthcare professional, and
Right.
got you sitting down and padded, wired up. Whereas that's not really how this works. TENS isn't something that you get done to you. It's something that you use to help you do something else. It's an adjunct, it's an extra. So it's very much something that you need to be actively involved with, is how we kind of use TENS, or that's how I believe the kind of TENS should be used properly, because it's very much you need to engage with it, switch it on, switch it off, use it in which, because it differs from person to person how best it is used and best it is employed, because of the differences in our experiences of pain and our anatomy and physiology.
And Douglas, your sister actually used one in the same way my mom did, right?
Yeah, she had one for her back, and she said it was kind of like a godsend and really did make a big difference. And it was implanted in her back, and she had a like a belt thing, and she said it made a really big difference in her pain level of her back.
I think you can get, this is what we hear often in practice, of these like lovely stories where I think it really does, for some people it helps hugely. So the kind of areas of practice, it doesn't have a huge amount of evidence in terms of, it's not used routinely because it's the research evidence isn't great behind the use of TENS. But I think what I tend to find is that it's because I think there's a lot of it between individual differences. So some people love TENS. Some people, they turn it on and they hate the feeling, the sensation, and so it just doesn't work for them. But when it's often used, one of the areas it's got kind of best evidence for is in labour pain. So when you're during childbirth, they often might have a TENS machine on the lower back, and that can kind of help with the pain of the contractions. And also others use it for some people use it with osteoarthritis, but back pain is quite a common usage as well. It's kind of at the point where there's maybe not much other things you can use, so you're taking the maximum amount of medication, or taking more medication might interact with other things that's going on. TENS is a cheap, safe, non-pharmacological kind of alternative that can often help improve your function.
So,
interesting.
How about your data, your study?
Yeah, do you want me to get
you have
into
a
that?
brand new study. So so this study is different, right? Then you have a generation after generation of study on this. Can you talk about how your study has just evolved to where it is now?
Yeah, of course I can. So, oops, sorry, my computer. So how it has evolved to here is, what I would like to talk about today is, this is actually some work that originated back from the PhD time, and when I was looking at TENS and that, and so we've kind of taken it in different stages now. But what this study is about the kind of experience of using TENS.
Either was or was not in for coffers. And the midst of
Oops, we have a little interference. I think Douglas turned on his TV.
Right, okay, no worries.
He was just giving you an example of how the TENS device can distract.
Yes, exactly. There you go. So yeah, this was a study, and that's what I was. For my PhD research, as I mentioned, we looked at experimental pain, and then whether or not the findings in our experimental pain would translate into clinical pain. So we've published already on this, and so what we found was, when we got people with P.A.D walking on a treadmill and you got them walking one time without TENS, and then we gave them either a placebo TENS or a real life TENS machine. They actually, they when they got the real life TENS, they were able to walk further and for longer. And so what we concluded from that was TENS can help walking performance on a treadmill.
Now, these are people that had never experienced TENS, because how do you do a placebo for TENS?
Exactly.
They'd never used one before, so they didn't know that you could actually feel. You had to tell them, oh, this isn't something that you feel.
Yeah, and that was the way of the study. So what was part of the
Okay.
inclusion criteria is you had to have not used the TENS device before to be included in this study.
Okay, yeah.
And what we told them was that, and which was quite true, but a bit sneaky in a way, is that we said we're testing different dosages. Some dosages you may feel, some you may not. But what we'd actually done is we'd made some very imperceptible cuts in the wire and then taped them back up again. So they would use the TENS machine as normal in the placebo. So they would turn it up and turn it on, but they would there would no current reaching the skin. And then for those who were using the actual TENS machine, they had it on, they were turning it up until they could feel it and using it all the way through their walking. So yeah, that was the gist of the study. But what we did is we did a follow-up, because we said, oh, that's all well and good, they can use it on a treadmill, but what about, because they're not going to be walking on treadmills and just using this in a clinical environment. This should be something they were using at home. So we did a follow-up study where we got 6 people from the kind of original study. We gave them all a TENS machine, we gave them some education, and we got them to go and use it for a month and then come back and tell us how they got on. So this is what I would like to share with you today. And so we've just recently published the findings of this study. So I've got some slides here which I'll share and go through them just now. So yeah, the basis of this was, as I mentioned, we were hearing a lot about the pain and kind of the amount of pain people were experiencing while walking, and that this was one of the main barriers of why people weren't walking. So we were interested in how they got on using TENS machine at home for claudication. So we did this because pain is the thing that generally stops people walking, or stop people engaging with walking so much when they have PAD. But there was no recommended treatment for the pain itself. I mean, with all the treatments that there are for PAD and the medications you can take to help reduce the impact of PAD, and the fact that we know that walking works really well, but there's actually no studies really looking at how do you actually reduce the pain experience. And what we thought is that TENS might be able to help. So because of all those things, as I mentioned, in terms of experimental pain and using it in other situations, we thought, well, TENS might be useful. It helped them, and we found it helped them walk further on a treadmill, but we didn't know whether it helps people walk normally in daily life. And its daily life is very different to the clinical environment. That's why we needed to look at both. So what is TENS? And I've kind of explained this a little bit already. As I mentioned, it's an acronym for transcutaneous electrical nerve stimulation. So big fancy words, but really, as I described, it's a small battery-powered device. You get these sticky pads of electrodes which you stick onto your skin, either over or around the painful area. You get the device sends these gentle pulses which feel like a tingling sensation, and it can be used for lots of different kind of clinical conditions. Why do we think it's good for claudication? Well, we found that people walk further with using TENS. What we wanted to know is, would they use it in real life? So what do? We got these 6 people with PAD. We trained them how to use TENS at home. We got them to use it for 4 weeks. And the kind of guidance we gave them was to use it whenever suited their life, because it wanted to make it a kind of pragmatic trial of, like, pragmatic meaning it fits around how people would use it in real life, rather than us putting some arbitrary kind of regulations on how they should. So what we tended to suggest is that the good thing about TENS is you can kind of put it on when you get up in the morning. You can stick it onto your leg or wherever you feel the pain. Put the TENS machine in your pocket, but obviously when walking around the house, you might not feel pain. But maybe when they go out to walk the dog or go to play golf or go shopping or go do their job, they might feel the pain. And the idea was that when they're doing an activity that would normally cause them pain, they just turn the device on, and that would help them in that situation. And then when they stop doing that activity, they can turn the device off again. And then what we did at the end of those 4 weeks, we got them all back in together. There was one person and did a focus group with them. There was one person who couldn't attend that focus group, so we followed up that person with a phone interview, and we wanted just to kind of these honest conversations between the group about what worked and what didn't. So a kind of important context to note about this is it's quite a small study. It's only 6 people, only in one area of Scotland where I was doing this. So it only really, the findings might not translate to different people, different experiences, different kind of life. And the people who had joined had already tried TENS within the study. They were all participants in the original treadmill study. So they obviously volunteered because they mustn't have hated TENS. Because if they'd hated the TENS on the treadmill, they probably wouldn't have said, oh yeah, give me one to use at home. So there is those important caveats to think about.
And I think it's important to note that you're not literally with P.A.D, there's no harm in helping to distract from the pain so you can walk further, because it's when you continue to push through that you're building those collateral network of vessels.
Yeah. And that was that kind of initial idea behind all this. And it's like, well, we want, it was we're often asking people for P.A.D to walk into pain. But that's really hard. And everyone was telling us, well, like, I mean, it's all well and good you telling me to walk into pain, you try it. Like, it's not fun, and so we were thinking, well, why we shouldn't be telling people to walk into pain if we're not also going to try and give a solution or reduce that experience of pain to some degree. And perhaps
with the same outcome, right? With the same result.
With the same results and the same improved efficiency of those muscles. And so that was the idea. It's like the more you walk into pain, hopefully the more efficacious or the more effects you'll get from the walking. So that was why.
So it's a bit like that hill climb on the bike, talking to a friend. I mean, you still do the hill climb, you're still focusing on your riding, but you're distracted from the pain of the climb, and then it doesn't seem to exist anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
So what did we find? Well, as you normally do with these kind of focus group studies, we gathered the transcripts, we recorded the whole conversation, and then I spent time going over and over that with another researcher as well, thinking about what are the themes, what are these people actually telling us, and how can we make sense of it? So these were the kind of main themes that that came from the discussion. So the first one was a bit about pain. So, some described the kind of what the pain felt like with TENS. Some people felt that the TENS numbed the pain. Others said they didn't change much at all. Another kind of theme was about expectations. So it was, again, some people expected the TENS to magically disappear the pain. And therefore, when it didn't do that, they were quite disappointed. Those other people had more realistic expectations and kind of we were aware that it was just going to distract or take the edge off the pain, and they were therefore more satisfied with the outcome. In terms of usability, the kind of some people couldn't be bothered with the wires and the pads and the turning on and off, and they got a bit frustrated with it. Other people just hated the tingling sensation. So, there was a bit about, as I mentioned, it works for some, doesn't for others, and there's bits about usability of the device that can be worked on. And then finally, the physical and social functioning was a kind of important theme. So there was the person who I mentioned that one of them was an avid golfer, funnily enough, being from Scotland, and what the TENS machine did was it meant that before with his pad he wasn't really able to play a round of golf without excruciating pain and really struggling. But with the TENS machine, he was able to walk much better, much more effectively, and enjoy his golf a lot more. Other people, were able to walk further and therefore do more of their other normal activities.
If you were to do it again, would you create a different expectation for those ones that were a little disappointed that it didn't erase the pain?
100%. That's one of the kind of key findings from this, is if you're going to use TENS, if you're prescribing TENS, you need to make sure you do the education and expectation management properly so that people enter into it with realistic expectations, not imagining, this is going to be a magic bullet and fix everything. So yeah, in terms of let's give you a sense of actually some of the words that these people were saying. This is some quotes from the study. So in terms of pain, you've got someone saying here, I did have some pain, but certainly nothing like what I would have had expected to experience. Someone else saying it was sort of numbing, not so sore, but was still there. The tingling takes the initial pain right away. And then the last one saying, it didn't do me any good. The pain was still there when I was using it, so not useful for them.
Was there anything in terms of the personalities of those who would say, such as that last patient, it didn't do me any good, the pain was still there when I was using it? Did you find some similarity in personality and the way in which they approach having a chronic illness?
I think there is definitely something in that. There's a lot about the kind of psychological effects, or kind of like their approach to, because I think there were people within the study who were just waiting for surgery, and felt quite helpless with their condition, and were saying, okay, well, I'll try it, but I just know it's not going to help. That kind of idea of the only thing that's going to fix me is getting operated on and getting a bypass or getting a stent put in. Otherwise than that, I don't see the point in this walking, but I'll do this because my doctor told me this might be useful. So almost they'd made up their mind beforehand that it wasn't going to be effective. And then otherwise you had some other people who are more willing and ready to engage with it. So I think, mindset did have a big impact.
Say, Chris,
I think that's the same with all.
Of these people, were any of them athletes or endurance athletes, or their exercise level they were used to? Because endurance training is all about pain management. I mean, it's part of the deal. It's actually not a problem. You just know how to deal with it. And I suspect if you took a bunch of marathoners, they would, they would give you a very different result.
I would agree. And none of these were endurance athletes at all. And I think that's what's important to think, is that this only really applies to people like these 6 who had quite, not necessarily characteristics that are representative of everyone with P.A.D. So I think each individual would have to kind of experience it to think about how it might affect them differently.
But if it helped some people, it was good.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So again, in terms of expectations, this was one of the quotes we picked out from there, and then someone said, my friend used it for her shoulder and said it worked perfectly for her, so it must be good. So this was a person who had a good outcome, and I think we thought that was probably linked towards they had an appropriate expectation of what it might do.
I mentioned that I listened to a lady on NPR when I was studying pain. I talked about it in one of my books somewhere. Anyway, she said that when she was in Iraq and things were really bad for, I think, the Shias, that she and her friends would practice handling pain by burning cigarettes on their arms so as they could prepare for handling torture if they were taken in by the police. And so they could train themselves to prepare for that. And that's what got me interested in, pain training. So, but I would say, these machines sound like more fun.
Hopefully.
Definitely more fun than cigarettes burning into your skin.
Yeah. So in terms of usability, these were some.
Try that at home.
Yeah, please don't. Yeah, these are some of the things that they said in terms of these usability. You've got to put these wires up through your trousers. It was quite a faff and inconvenience to kind of how to do it. Tingling, some loved it, others couldn't stand it. And one person kind of was put off by they inadvertently sat on the machine and it turned the volume right up on the electrical stimulation, so they got a bit of a fright from that, and so therefore were kind of put off by it. And some wore it in some ways, some used it slightly differently. So this one person put it on for their full 18 holes of golf, other people wore it all day, some only put it on when they needed it for long walks.
And for
other
those that
people,
are just joining in, I know we have people joining in at different times because we're live. We're talking about TENS devices that have the electrical currents that go through. It's a little device you wear. You put the little electrodes right on
Yeah.
your legs, and they're the whole goal is to distract you from the claudication when you're walking.
That's right. Exactly. So yeah, and there was this other kind of social aspect of it. People were quite self-conscious when others spotted the device, and their friends maybe said, "What are you doing? What's that you've got on there? Are you trying to bug us?" Or something like, the idea of seeing these wires coming out from under their clothes. So,
Yeah.
there's a kind of lots of bits about how the TENS could be perhaps designed differently to fit in with people's lives a bit more effectively. And yeah, this was the about the kind of impact of wearing it. So this participant, about the one who did a lot of golf, talked about not being able to get around this course without stopping and shaking their leg, which becomes embarrassing when you're holding your friends up who you're golfing with. But with TENS, they were able to walk a lot further. Yeah. So what do we surmise or conclude from this study? Well, first of all, that TENS might be worth knowing about. It could be useful for individuals with PAD. So it's it's safe, it's non-drug. You can get it off the internet or from a pharmacy or just across the counter without any prescription. Important to note, will not erase the pain, but for some people, it does take the edge off and might help people keep moving. For clinicians, in terms of those dealing with people with PAD, how you introduce TENS and explain TENS is really important because it shapes how it's experienced. So we need to make sure that you give a clear, calm conversation about what TENS is going to do or what it won't do, so people don't have unrealistic expectations. And in terms of research, what we kind of derived from this was that, pain is really important. It's the central barrier. It's the main thing that people talk about in terms of walking. So, we need to more focus on this in research in terms of understanding the experience of pain and figuring out ways to perhaps reduce the experience to help people engage in walking and other behaviors, or just to be able to just function and improve their quality of life. So this that's the kind of general summary. As last week, the paper is available here. It was published in the Journal of Vascular Nursing earlier this year, so I will put a link in the chat for this. It's obviously, as we talked about last week, quite a dry way of experiencing it. But if you want to there's loads more quotes and lots more information within the actual paper. So if you're interested in a bit of reading, please.
What I like is that you put it in the Journal of Vascular Nursing, because nurses are on the front lines, and a lot of the times the doctors are focused more on the procedures, right, and the medications that help. But this is something that when the nurse has a moment with the patient and they're just talking, and the patient saying, "Oh my gosh, the doctor isn't helping me with my pain, it's telling me to walk, the nurse can say, well, I mean, there's a study out there talking about these TENS devices.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and I think that was
awesome.
That's generally what we found, is that in terms of nursing colleagues and other physical therapists, and are generally the ones who are going to be doing more of this work with people with pain and with your walk and with the exercise, and therefore that was kind of who we were trying to target. We think we might be most interested in this.
And so are you planning, I'm imagining, yet another study with the TENS device? I almost think that you're really edging towards even creating a device specifically for walking. And people might wonder, well, if there are all these ones that are already out there, then why would you want to create yet another wheel? But there are specific things that you're learning that these patients require for PAD, and particularly the wireless. And there might be kits that you might be able to develop that are specifically for PAD, with instructions, right, of where to put each, depending on where you experience the claudication.
Yeah, and I think that's so we are doing more studies. So we've now done another, or a study we published last year as well. Actually, we gave people TENS machines for a longer period of time, so more than a week, and we also did education alongside it. That was our kind of pre-paid study where we mixed education and TENS machines to see if that would help improve physical activity. And so we've done an initial study of that, and we published the findings of that with, again, some more qualitative work about how people experience using TENS. And we're continuing to do this work. What we're now working on is because the kind of the information about the wireless, or the kind of the usability of the device, we've updated, and we're wanting to test some of these more wireless devices. We haven't gone to the point of designing our own devices because there is so much out there, and I think so many that work really well. So what we're trying to do is figure out what are the characteristics of the best kind of device for people with PAD. But I think often it might also be an individual preference. So I think there might be some that work for one. There might be something that works for one person that would be quite different that might work for someone else.
I think it would be amazing to have the device designed so it can go on your wrist, right? And they press a button. So it's just minimal, and then it shoots the electrode. I don't know if that's possible. Then you'd have you'd have to go down the body for that.
Yeah. No, I mean,
you might, that's
I've
a
just
lot.
put a link in the chat there. These are the ones that we're looking at now, which is a wireless TENS machine, and it's it's kind of a rechargeable. You don't have batteries now. It's all USB-C kind of recharge, and the controlling device is something that you kind of place. That's it. Oh, thanks for sharing. Yeah, that you kind of place in your pocket and control it from there. So you can see, imagining with this, rather than again having two electrodes, you just have one that kind of fits and can go around your calf or around your thigh like that. And we found that people who like this addresses the issues of wires, it addresses the issues of bulkiness.
Yeah, that's actually
like
cool.
So these work really nicely. Now there are many. I'm not just recommending this. This is the one that we happen to use, but there are many other versions of this out there. I get no commission for recommending these ones.
Anything that reduces the use of painkillers, gets people moving, and reduces amputations, even to a small percentage, is really, really good. I mean, this is, we have to counter, the amputation approach for the walking, and growing collaterals approach. And this is really a good thing. And I think for some people, it's probably a really good thing. So, pain, the other side of this is you have to know the difference between good pain and bad pain, where pain is indicating some damage to tissue. Most people are pretty unfamiliar with those concepts. I mean, if you're into endurance training, then that's part of the game, and hey, I better stop or I'm going to pull this muscle and I won't be able to run for weeks. But most people don't do that, and I don't know why. And so somehow we need to start. I remember I wrote an article about high school cross-country training, and the local high school, my stepkids all did cross-country, and they hired a coach who didn't focus on winning. He focused on teaching them how to run well. The parents were all focused on winning, and they would harass the staff and harass the school, if their team wasn't winning or their daughter or son wasn't winning. But this guy didn't do that. I met him, and he was really into encouraging them to run without injury so they could run for the rest of their life. And guess what the school did?
They fire him.
Correct. They fired him because the parents complained that they weren't winning. And so there's actually a winning obsession in America, which is totally counter to exercise and training for your whole life. And so I don't know how to change that, but it's a real fact. Excuse me, I have a real pain here with my dogs.
But it's good. The dogs are worth having because a study shows that you walk 22 minutes more if you do have a dog. And I think that would be great if you could have a TENS device so you can walk your dog further and faster. The TENS device for you, not your dog, just
Yeah.
making
Yeah.
sure. But Kathy has a question for you. Kathy, go ahead and unmute.
I was just asking Chris if they still required the 2 within range treadmill tests for the clinical trials, because that was the only reason I didn't qualify for the P.A.D
Yeah.
trial. And I was really disappointed, really upset about it actually, which is how I got involved with all this in the first place, because I was so upset about it that I went and bought one anyway. And
Yeah.
then I wrote to the researcher saying, to UK, saying, how do I program this piece of kit? And he very kindly sent me back the exact specifics, because I didn't qualify for the trial. So there was no, because it was a blind trial. There were some people who had it set at one thing and some people who had the placebo setting. And obviously I wanted the actual setting that they reckoned an impression with it. Now, I liked it. I found it really useful. I got it at a really low point in my walking life, and it got me going again and kept me going for a long time. I mean, that was 2019, but I'm going to try it again. I'd already asked Chris for the make that they were using, the wireless one, because the wires were a perfect nuisance. But the reason that I didn't qualify, which apparently at the time was the single biggest reason why people didn't qualify and why the numbers of participants were so low, was that I was unable to walk in 2 different dates within the same range that would be required to show an improvement. And my gripe about this was, I don't care about the clinical improvement. It doesn't matter to me about the clinical improvement. What matters to me is whether I can put the bin out and collect my neighbour's bin without pain. I know the day that I don't have pain, and I know the day I have pain, and that's when you really notice it. It doesn't matter to me as a user of this and a patient whether or not, and I understand it matters for the trial, but given that we all live with these independent assessment measures, we all know, everyone who's got P.A.D knows the day that they can take the shopping trolley around, or they can walk around the car park, or they could run this distance, or they could do 10 squats, and the day that they can't do it. We're all living with that on a daily basis. You really notice if there's a pickup, an improvement, or a downturn.
Yeah.
So is it so important? Could we not just ask people to find something that they did, and to then ask them if the TENS machine improved that, whatever it was?
Yeah. I think you've hit a really good point, and that was one of the key learnings from that trial that you mentioned that you were ineligible for. So we'd set that criteria of, because the primary outcome of the trial, the thing we thought we were going to change, was treadmill walking distance. Excuse me, because that is generally the gold standard outcome in P.A.D trials. And so what we thought is, we wanted people who could walk to a consistent level on the treadmill, so the same distance 1 week to the next, so that if there was any difference by the end of the trial, by the end of the 6 weeks or 12 weeks or 24 weeks, then we knew that the difference was due to what we did in the trial, not just general variation. But what we learned is, obviously, as you mentioned, Kathy, is that in this population, it's a fallacy to try and think that you can get to walk consistently. And as you say, so we tested about 100 people with P.A.D who had volunteered, given up their time to come to be part of the trial, and we had to exclude about 50% of them because they weren't able to walk consistently. So that's our main recommendation from that trial, is not to do that again. So that won't be included within future trials that we will do.
That's good, because the particularly irritating thing for me was, I use my treadmill to time exactly how far, and back, on what, everything's got to be equal. That's when I know when, so I can say with absolute confidence that I've got about a 70% deterioration in my walking since last November, because I know what I cannot do now. I don't know why. I've got my own theories, but I don't know why. But I do know that it is. And I've always, I mean, that's 20 years now I've been measuring my steps in a treadmill.
Yeah.
So when I sent the thing to UK saying, I've used this TENS, look at my steps, and they had trebled in the time since I started using it. I'd trebled my steps.
That's fantastic.
So he wrote back and said, "Oh, I'd really like you to get involved with another trial," and I've been kind of in this ever since. But it
That's
was a
it.
very valuable lesson.
Yeah,
I
we're
don't know,
never good.
Kevin might have some thoughts on people measuring their own performance, because I think it is really important, even if that performance is walking from the car to the supermarket or walking round the supermarket or putting a bin out, because these are the day-to-day things that people have to do, and it can make a real difference in their life.
This is the problem of objective versus subjective data for which we use different statistics. And so at the end of the day, you need big enough studies to run the stats for objective versus subjective interpretation of what's going on. And there's a lot of very valuable subjective data, but it's very hard to nail down when it comes to looking at statistical significance. You need decent sized studies. And that is the problem with subjective, but it's often the best data and it gets wasted.
I'm curious, Dr. Seenan, have you seen other people studying this across the planet? I have not seen it as
There are,
prevalent as what
yeah.
you're working on.
No, there's not that many, but there's one or two others. So there's a group in France that have done quite a lot of studies into TENS as well. They've got a slightly different approach, whereas
Yeah.
they tend to use it as I talked about, as quite a passive modality. So they like do TENS to people. So they get the person into the hospital, they like give them a certain amount of TENS, and then they get them to kind of do the walking and see how that goes. So they've just almost got a different philosophy of how it might work. And then there's also a group down in London at Imperial College in London who use TENS, but also what they call electrical muscle stimulation. So they kind of use it's like TENS, but a bit more intense, where they're actually thinking they're looking for physiological changes, and that's their group that do a lot of work on that Retrieve machine, I think, or is that Revitive? Obviously that
I've
one.
got one. I've followed their studies.
Yeah.
They were doing work with diabetics,
Yeah.
interestingly.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of debate about Revitive on these
Yeah.
boards.
Oh, totally. I think so. I've got my own opinions, which I'll keep to myself for the
Oh
moment.
no,
But
my vascular surgeon shared them, but as I pointed out to him, he was doing sweet F all, so I was going to buy one.
so
I did find it quite helpful.
I think it's just, I think electrical, there is an interest in electrical stimulation in P.A.D and how it might work and what it might do. I think it's just where you've got the different groups kind of almost have a different idea of how it might help or how best to do it. And so we're all just doing a bit of work and we'll see kind of see what works and see what we can share with each other.
Yeah, I think it's such great research. And I think this is something, I mean, is there any harm that can come to using a TENS device wrong or choosing the wrong TENS device?
So in short, no, and then I think as long as you read the instructions on the machine and follow the instructions as there are. But I mean, and that's why I stress the fact that these are available over the counter without prescription, without oversight from a medical professional. They are safe, they've been tested rigorously, and they have this CE mark, which shows they are kind of fine for anyone to use and to have a go with. I think there are contraindications, so there are things you have to be careful with. So, for example, using sorry to see Douglas's comment.
Douglas is we have to share, but because he's right, honestly. I mean, I don't know if it comes in contact with liquid.
It's electrical current, so you wouldn't have this on and go in the bath or go in the shower or go swimming with this on, because then there's a risk for electric shock. You need to be careful not to, if you have damaged or broken skin, the electrodes, because they're self-adhesive and sticking over that, they might irritate that skin or cause. So you have to give your skin breaks from using it. So you have to make sure you take the pads off and put them back on. But for these kind of things, it's what you would term almost as like common sense when using these, as long as you follow the instructions on the machine, the contraindications. The only other thing to mention is it's contraindicated for those with a pacemaker. So if you have an implanted pacemaker, what you have to be careful is, but in that case, what the research shows is just don't use the TENS device over where your pacemaker is. So, don't be putting the electrodes over your chest and over and that way, so that the electrical current doesn't interfere with the device. If you've got P.A.D and you're using it on your legs, that shouldn't be a problem. So I think that's all I would just do is I would stress that for anyone's interested in use it, by all means go and get advice from your medical professional, healthcare professionals, just to check. Make sure whatever you're buying, you buy from a reputable, manufacturer that comes with all this kind of safety information, and just
And
read
in the
the
UK, the
information.
good ones, they do have the CE mark.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Especially
We
maybe.
always look for the CE mark. Yeah.
I think
Thanks.
that's really-
relying on common sense is dangerous.
I know. I do. I realize that. as
Because
I
there's
said.
no such thing. I mean, think of the,
Have you seen the YouTube videos?
well, yeah, but just think of the poodle in the microwave and the lady who burned herself with coffee from McDonald's, both of which were settled for large amounts of money. And so, yeah, that's why there's all this fine print from the lawyers in every product.
Yeah.
But I think this is, they should do that with some of these drugs and surgeries. But this is an alternative to that. So I'm really glad you're doing these studies, to be honest.
Great. Thanks.
And I'm
I have a
curious,
question.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Hi, Carl.
This is pretty fascinating. So I've been improving my distance, my speed, and my duration. But this last week, so I've always had a pretty high pain tolerance, and so this last week I think I was pushing too hard, and I'm getting kind of the talk from my plantar fascia on my affected leg, and maybe a little bit of Achilles tendonitis. It's just like it's nagging me right now, telling me I need to pay attention, but it's not like full blown. And so being that I can push myself hard enough to do that kind of damage, would using TENS kind of confuse my own signaling to my body to where I might not recognize that I am exceeding?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think my kind of initial response would be that I don't think it would. I don't think you could, because if you think about in terms of what TENS does, and it's not trying not to be honest about it, it just does that distraction. It only works when it's turned on. The minute you turn off, the effect goes away. So you still do feel those signals from your body. I mean, I think what you have to be careful with, and what you're kind of, as you're suggesting, is any kind of sudden change in level or kind of or amount of activity can put additional strain on your tissues. And I think it's whatever you have to just make the changes more gradually, perhaps. So when you're using TENS, don't go from not walking at all to walking every day all the time, and that for anyone but the body will say, well, wait a minute, I wasn't quite ready for this. You didn't build up to it. So I think it's just kind of gradual increases, but I think Kevin might be a better person to answer along those lines.
Yeah, you have to respect the 10% rule, or when you're older, maybe even the 5% rule, which means that for runners or cyclists or even swimmers, but less so for swimmers, you should never increase the distance or amount of effort by more than 10% a week or every month. Depending on your strength and your history, you need to have that in mind, because it's very tempting when you're doing well, especially during a workout. If the workout is going well, never change the workout while you have these endorphins going around us. That's when you really get injured. So the 10% rule, which is of course described in, Live Strong for runners or whatever, is what you need for that. And sometimes it's hard to assess, because, you're saying you're going to go harder, but what's 10%? And that you have to assess. So the 10% rule should protect you from self-induced injury. And that is also a function of a good coach. A good coach is there to prevent you from injuring yourself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
But there's always a risk. A life, I always say, a life without risk is no life at all. And that is the problem with a litigious society. It kind of discourages responsibility for risk.
Hmm. That's true. And there is always that risk with anyone. I was just yesterday, I was going to share that picture of I had to do a test because I forgot to tell you a really important thing, Kevin. Kevin always talks on here about the right way to walk, right? Walking, making sure using your whole body. So I went and did, because I have asthma and we have heart disease just in my family. So they just wanted to double check my heart. And so they did this VO2 test to make sure that I'm the oxygen, right? Dr. Seenan is really being distributed properly, through your body while you're exercising. So they put me in this gear, and that was tough enough to breathe, especially, I don't know, for a normal person, but with someone who has asthma, I was like, whoa, okay. And they make sure that there's nothing coming in or out, like it's only coming through this hole. Anyway, so they put me on this treadmill and told me I needed to hold on as they were slowly increasing to the point where they had me, and I was literally hanging on. I swear to God, I wish she would have had video of this, hanging on for dear life with an incline that was just like, I was just pulling like this. The gravity was just pulling me back. And I got home yesterday, and my knee was bothering me so much, even to the point I'd go down to pick up the dogs. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not moving because I feel like my whole knee is going to go out. And I've never experienced that before. So no matter what you're doing, what device you're using, you need to make sure that you don't forget to walk with your whole body and remember those techniques. Because I can almost imagine that people, when they're with these devices, if they're holding on to a remote, they might just have their arm up here like this, waiting for the next one. And that might lead to other problems where, you really should be moving those arms and walking with your whole body.
Yeah.
Stop.
Kevin's going off with his dog. This is probably a good place to end it. Any final thoughts, Dr. Seenan? Any other questions about this TENS device? I'd be really curious. Would like to finish with a great success story that just makes you smile, that keeps you going and continuing to research, because you just know that this can make the biggest difference for people.
Yeah. And I think that's it. And as Kathy shared, it's either her experience of using TENS, it's those kind of things which kind of help keep me pushing forward. And as I say, that story of that individual, the golfer in the study that we did there, it was just that feeling that exudes from them, that relief, that kind of, it's like, well, there was a thing I wasn't able to do. I used this dice and now I can do it. And it's the fulfillment that gave that individual. There was another one in the study who all he wanted to do was go to the pub with his friends and then walk to the football match. And before, he wasn't able to do that because his friends wouldn't wait for him and they would walk on and he wouldn't enjoy. But using the TENS machine, he was able to engage with that. And it's just being able to do those things which everyone else normally takes for granted, but when you live with P.A.D, it can make these things really difficult. So if TENS can help in a little way, or some of the stuff we can do helps a little way with those, that's what really keeps me driving on.
And I'm going to put, for those of you that are watching on YouTube, I don't know, maybe I can give it to our producer Josh. I have the link right here that maybe we could share in the comment section of the YouTube clip. And I'll also share it on our Facebook, because it is a really interesting read. And I think that other people, I hope I grabbed the right one. It says 2026, so this is right. Journal for Vascular Nursing. But we'd love to have you back on, Dr. Seenan, and continue to follow your research. And if people have more questions about these TENS devices, make sure email us at info@padhelp.org, and we'll forward them on to Dr. Seenan. I wish we could expand your research base and include people remotely from places across the globe that could maybe share, even informally,
Yeah.
how it's helping them. So it might be worth doing, you know, something with you maybe once a month, and people who want to participate, we can put a sign up and give the disclaimer, you participate at your own pace, and see if it helps
That would be
some
brilliant.
folks. So make sure, email us if you're interested in something like that, maybe participating in a global informal studies somehow. We could figure out the details and see if there's something that we can do to make this work. But email us at info@padhelp.org. And with that email, you can also get invited and the link to join our studio audience. But if you are watching on YouTube, do like this video and subscribe to our channel and join us every single week. Thank you to my co-host, Kevin Thomas Morgan. Don't forget to sign up for his newsletter at inspirationalselfhelpbooks.com. And big thank you to Dr. Chris Seenan as well for all your research and helping us to improve our pace.
Yeah, thank you, Chris.
Thanks all. Lovely to be here.
Thank you.